Mitch, you're muted if you're talking.
That would explain why no one's responding. Thanks. I will try that again. Everybody, we're at about 5 minutes after, so we'll kick this off. We have a very full agenda this week. So just going to hand it straight over to Zhangpeng to lead us through this conversation about envoy filters in ambient.
Yeah. I recently sent a fix around the tag-reef envoy filter. I think it introduced a new breaking change that reminded me maybe we should take this PR forward, and so we can make all the breaking things in just one release in the release. So I think there was a lot of discussion in this PR. So I'm not sure what is left and what and anything maybe more feedback from TLC or other.
So Zhangpeng, can you take us through what the breaking change is? Because I don't see an issue tracking that.
Yeah, there was someone report about that the tag-reef didn't work as expected, because once you, for example, you have a multi-tag-reef, maybe for 2 gateways, maybe just 1 gateway, but it will work for all the gateways. And during the debugging, I found out it was never implemented correctly, because it was always be ignored and just fall back to the empty workload selector. So that means select all the workload. So I think that's the problem. And I think my PR fixed that and was got matched, but it will introduce a new break change, because in the previous versions, you can select a waypoint with workload selected, and in 127, it will not work. You need to use target ref.
And target ref can't specify the waypoint workload?
It can specify the gateway resource.
So does that accomplish the same goal, or I'm a little bit unclear what the break is?
Yeah, because before 127, I think the end user and the E2E test just use a workload selector for waypoint. And after that, you need to use tag ref for any gateway provisioned by gateway API. Not just
okay, so this will affect sidecars as well as ambient, is that correct?
It will affect the ingress, egress gateway and the waypoint.
Okay, well, that does sound concerning. Can you walk us through what the fix is here and how this fixes target ref and workload selectors?
I think the core logic should be in the push context Django. Can you open that file?
Push context. I don't see push context in this pull request. This is an API pull request.
Your screen is showing a different pull request into Istio.
Oh, sorry. Okay, push context, right.
Push here is the core logic change.
Okay, so I'm not quite following. The notes seem to say that this change was a breaking change. Yeah. It's already merged, but then you had indicated an API change to fix the break, which I have over here.
No. I think Howard merged this PI because we all believe that my PI is the right direction. And it already introduced a breaking change around the tag refs and worker selector. So I recall there was another API around the context. We want to introduce a new context, maybe named waypoint for waypoint only. So if we if we need to introduce some breaking change, maybe we'd better introduce them in just one release.
Okay. So I'm not entirely clear what the proposed fix is for the breaking change at this point.
Mitch, maybe I can reword it if it
Thank
helps. Basically, we already made a breaking change in master, and there are other planned breaking changes. So we should do those in one release instead of two, is I think what the message is. Yeah. So it's not that the API change fixes the breaking change. It's just if we're going to do two breaking changes, that ought to be in one release, just to avoid, pain.
Gotcha. So I know we had talked about breaking changes to Envoy filter in ambient. That totally makes sense to me. I'm concerned that we're saying this also breaks the use of gateway API even in sidecar mode.
It's not. So basically what would happen is you would make a Envoy filter and you'd say it attaches to this gateway. Then it attaches actually globally. That was the bug. So the breaking fix makes it so that sidecars actually work better because they don't get the wrong policies attached to them. But now maybe you expected that or something.
Sure, every bug has someone using it as a feature.
Yeah, so it's not really that we're breaking sidecars. We're actually fixing sidecars. We're fixing sidecars and we're breaking ambient users. And by breaking, I mean we're not like breaking them. They just need to make adjustments.
So we're still able to use workload selectors to target ingress gateways in sidecar mode? Exactly,
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. It's just that logic didn't take into account the target refs, and so it was looking at it and it was saying like, oh, there's no label selector, so that means it applies to everything, when it should really be, oh, actually there's a target ref, so it applies to this very specific thing.
I see. Thank you. Keith?
I think John covered most of what I was going to say. As far as the planned breaking changes to waypoints and like waypoint context, I think that currently that proposal for making Envoy filter work for waypoints is something that we're like willing to pursue like as a community. COC sort of agreed on that, but I don't know that there's an owner there. So while it'll be great, I think, to get it into this release, I think feature freeze is in a month, something like that. We would ideally be seeing some work happen on that right now. So I'd, at least from my perspective, I think that if we do want to avoid two breaking changes and bundle them together, we need to have a champion really push that forward. In order to make that happen.
And what more work, what kind of scope are we talking about in terms of work that would need to be accomplished in the next month?
It was basically that entire, I don't even know if you still have access to the message, but John had a sort of an outline of different changes that would potentially need to take place to make Envoy filter, what's the best way to say it, sort of retrofit it or adapt it to make sense in the ambient world with like a waypoint context, etc. There are a couple of things, like it could be done maybe in two-ish, well, there's some API changes for one, and then you need the implementation. So maybe 2 or 3 PRs, but fairly in depth to how Envoy filter works would be my understanding. John might have a different opinion because of course he wrote it, but it's not a trivial amount of work, one way or another.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. If the message is lost, I have it saved somewhere that I can dig up. So.
Well, Z-Rain, are you suggesting that you would be the champion for this work?
Yeah, I'm not sure the PR owners still interested in it, but if there's no one want to take it, I can move it forward after the API is merged.
To be clear, I don't think that the current state of this API PR is mergeable as is today. There is an additional waypoint context, but I don't know that this is sufficient for what we would really want based on that message. I might be wrong, but I don't know that this is all we would need.
Yes. I don't know where it is wrong, but right now it looks good. Looks good to me. And if you have more concern, I think we need to figure out what it is, and we can keep discussing on it. But
Yeah,
we
can
need
definitely
to
continue iterating. I'll say it's
Mm.
pretty unusual for us to have an API change that is not accompanied by a design doc that specs out kind of where we're going, what we're doing, and evaluates options. Because APIs are so hard to take back, that is the normal standard that we would use. And I don't see, is there a design doc somewhere that maybe isn't linked?
There's
I'm not
not on the. I copied what I sent to the TOC group, which was basically my design doc over Slack message because I was about to go on leave and didn't have time to write a design. I put that on the doc. So, I mean, that's my one opinion. It's not the agreed plan or anything, but if someone wants to take that as a starting point, and that will also give some context on why I don't feel like, and I assume Keith was why he was saying the same thing, that just adding context isn't actually sufficient. I think it's a step, but it's not the full solution.
Okay,
So
so we
I-
should get that
go ahead,
converted
sorry.
into a design doc where we can have kind of our normal back and forth and conversation, evaluate, go through approval process. It'd be a tight goal to get it done by 127. I don't know if it's impossible, but it'd be challenging. If we don't make it in by the 127 cutoff, do we want to roll back the bug fix around Envoy filters, or allow there to be 2 potentially breaking changes?
If there is any time to allow 2 breaking changes, it should be on Envoy filter, is my opinion. I think we could actually stand to have more frequent breaking changes to make the contract clear to users. I'm not advocating for purposeful user pain, but it is a true bug fix, one that is, that we absolutely should fix and keep it in. And I don't think we should extend further than we should in order to try to reduce pain on a perma experimental resource.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's see, we need someone to take an action item, at least to, oh, John, you put it in the doc. Here we go. You put your feedback in the doc. We need someone to drive a design doc, and Jumphang, I'm hearing that maybe that's you.
So maybe I need the context from John. I can help with the document work.
Okay, yeah, you should be able to see some of the context here in the meeting notes. John's shared what was a Slack message to TOC in terms of concerns, and then if we're able to address those concerns with the design doc, as well as outline the change that we've got proposed already, I think that'll be great.
Okay, I can try on it. And hope we can get it in time, because I don't think we can. I think we should avoid too much breaking change in.
Yeah,
I will commit to reviewing a design doc the day or week that it's out if I'm in office. So I will do what I can to help move it forward if that design doc is there, even asynchronously.
Okay. That's all for me.
All right, I'll add that decision here, but in the meantime, I'll hand things off to Jiewei, who I think we're talking about mesh config merging again.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I bring up this topic several weeks ago. So I think at that time we need more like evidence about to support this case. So I tried to do some research. I'll come back. So some background information is, so currently we have for mesh config, we have two major mechanisms. The first is standard mesh config will take the precedence over the shared mesh config. And of course, there are some annotations can take higher priority. The second thing is if shared mesh config and standard mesh config has conflict, standard mesh config will completely override the content in shared mesh config. I would say this complete override will happen on the top level mesh config field instead of a deep merge. Like in my issue above, I linked to the issue here, I mentioned an outdated mesh config field, which is tracing. And I do agree that one is outdated. So I try to find more mesh config fields that will be affected. Hopefully, it can persuade people that this is a more generic problem. And here I list several. I also have one concrete example, which is gateway topology. This mesh config field has several subfields, like number trusted proxies or forward client cert details. So I have example here. For example, the cloud provider or the infra team, they provide the shared mesh config, something like this. For example, they set the number trusted proxy is 3. What will happen for customers or dev team? They can specify, they can still use shared mesh config, but if they specify something like below, number trusted proxy is 1, it will not work. Of course, since shared mesh config take the precedence. If they want to specify some more, like forward client details and some other subfield, it will also not work because it's complete override on the level of gateway topology. So eventually, no matter what customer or dev team they specify under gateway topology, it will be completely override. So the only thing left is number trusted proxy is 3. So, yeah, hopefully this example is kind of clear. Yes, I think this is kind of anti-intuitive. Like what dev team they specified some new fields other than number trusted proxy, still not take effect, right? My proposal is.
Jerry, I'm going to interrupt you just real briefly and let you get back to it. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the problem is not that the standard mesh config overrides shared. Like when standard mesh config says num trusted proxies 3, shared says 1, we would expect it to use 3. The problem is that the standard config says nothing about forward client cert details, and yet that whole field is still going to get erased in the merge. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. To add one more piece. Yeah, I totally agree. And this proposal, not the goal of this proposal, not to change the precedence order. That's a big change. I try to propose something much smaller, and I think it's backward compatible. Which is, so right now, though, whenever there's a conflict, our behavior is complete override. So my proposal is to add a feature flag, something like environment variable, so customer can opt out. Customer can opt in the deep merge behavior. It's an opt-in. So by default, nothing will change. It's opt-in feature. So I just want to see what other people's thoughts.
Yeah, this is not super helpful comment necessarily, but like I just worry, like there's no correct merging behavior necessarily, right? If we merge the other way, then someone would be commenting here that they expected forward client cert details to not be set. So I'm just worried that we're trading off like two not quite correct behaviors. And then we let the user pick, but they're picking at a granularity that's maybe not where they want or where they want to know about. And that would just cause potentially more confusion.
John, I'll push back just a little bit and say, well, I agree that there's no like 100% correct merge strategy. I do think there are more or less correct models, and implicitly overriding the shared chart without actually specifying the fields you're overriding does not seem like a good behavior. It does seem like it would be a net improvement to stop doing that, right?
I don't think that's necessarily true. Like there's configs that are atomic units. So stepping back a bit, like in Kubernetes, each type has an explicitly defined merge criteria. So for example, if you have a port, it completely overrides it in like service, because it doesn't make sense to like merge the port number and the port name from something else, right? Those are overrides. But in the environment variable list, for example, those really do make sense to merge. And actually you want to do, but not like on each name. Like you want to replace, if I said environment variable foo here and foo there, that is like replace operation, but the list is merged, right? And so we actually have in Istio some of those already for specific types, like specialized merge criteria, like trust domain aliases, for example. It's a list, we merge those lists instead of replace. Now, there's a lot of fields, and even if you pick like a specialized one, there's always going to be cases where it's still not what you want it to happen as a user, right?
Sure. So then is maybe the fix that we define those specialized merge strategies for mesh config fields?
Sorry, let me chime in a bit. Mitch, could you open the link I shared in the chat?
Sure.
Actually, I checked the code recently. I do understand that we have some customized logic. For example, in proxy config, we're dealing with some headers, something like that. What my proposal is specifically pointed to that piece of code. Maybe I just linked it here. Is it okay? Mitch, could you open?
I'm trying. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties over here.
I just highlighted it in the doc. If you see my cursor, I highlighted. Oh yeah, this piece, just one line 174 to 185. So this piece of code actually is doing the complete override. So my proposal is just try to use an alternative approach for this one. So,
right, but that's not the full code, because we start with that, but then we go and we later modify it and patch in the merging behavior on top of it.
Yeah. Personally, I just feel like you see one line 78. So because this typically when we do on Marshall, the structure is we will create empty structure, right? So here this PB is not empty. That's the reason this completely merged behavior is rely on what the library is doing, right? It's not defined by us. Right.
Right, but we picked a library because it gave the behavior that we decided we wanted. I mean, I don't know if it was a good decision or a well thought out decision, but I'm just not sure. Like we already have a bespoke merged logic. And so the fact that we're using the library to do that, I don't understand why.
So it means we're okay that some field specified in shared mesh config are slightly be dropped. Right. We're okay.
I think maybe that's where we should focus on the use case that we're trying to enable here, right? So we've got the cloud provider config is setting the number of trusted proxies. And we want that to continue functioning the way that it has in the past. but the end user config or the customer config wants to specify the forward client cert details. That seems like a valid use case for Istio mesh config and for the merge semantics, but it's currently not permitted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like on that specific case, I'm not sure that it's valid that you want to configure that non-trusted proxies. Like that's actually opening up a security issue. Then they don't use your gateway or something, which I assume is what the number is tuned for. But I'll leave that to the cloud providers. I will say one thing that I had done in the past as an offering was we had actually 3 tiers of mesh config, which was the defaults for the platform, then the user's config, and then the hard overrides for the platform. That meant the user could not override them. And this can be done with Istio today. I forget how exactly you do it, but it's possible. It still doesn't fix this particular issue because then when you override it, you'd wipe out their config. It was used more for like trust domain and some other fields that are simple strings. But just throwing it out there. It's not really a solution to this, just something that might be useful if you're providing Istio as a service.
Okay. So we do have other, like if this particular example isn't great, we do have other examples like access logging, readiness probing, and gateway topology. I guess gateway topology is what we're showing here. Each of these are going to have scenarios where we need to be able to merge mesh configs in a reasonable way, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, and I totally understand the problem, and I think it's a legitimate problem. I just don't know that the fix is like making a new merge strategy. It's like deep merge, and then everything's happy because it's so specialized to one thing.
Right. So maybe that
also,
maybe
like,
specifying specific merge strategies, like you were talking about, other CRDs do.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not terribly against it. It's not the worst thing in the world if we do it. I just do worry that suddenly you're going to see the opposite problem, like, oh, we deep merged when we didn't mean to, which is exactly why we do it the way we do it today.
Gotcha.
A lot of times you don't want to deep merge. Like if, they set the tracing provider to Zipkin and they want Jaeger, like you don't want both. I don't think you can even have both. So
yeah, I understand the concern. So is it we try to add a customized logic for each each scenarios? Is it the idea, right? For different scenarios, we just add.
That is one proposal that we're kind of discussing, but it wouldn't be like, we're not talking about different libraries for different fields or things like that. Kubernetes provides a way to describe merge strategies for different objects. And I imagine we could build off of that infrastructure. But I see Keith's had his hand up for a long time.
Yeah, I just worry about merge strategies when it comes to excuse me, merge strategies, and like, what if we pick the wrong one? Or what if we pick something that the user is trying to give? I mean, we're not going to be able to necessarily. I don't know. I'm not. I get that we're not going to be able to ever make the right decision for every organization out there. Especially with all the different variations and personas, right? So like for a waypoint, that's a gateway technically, and you might want to have different for client cert details for one waypoint versus the next waypoint based on the traffic path. Granted, that's a proxy config thing, but like as a contrived example, like there are cases where the sort of gateway API based personas model doesn't always fit with the objects that are being deployed. And I just wonder about the trade-offs of such complex merging logic, and it's still not providing us really what we need, or what still not providing the solution for everybody. So I just wonder, trade-off wise, does it make sense to just have deep merge and shallow merge? And if that doesn't solve the problem for people, then it almost sounds like what might be better would be to look into that. Well, maybe the three-way merge that John was talking about, not sure. I worry about a lot of complexity is sort of the top level comment. There's a lot of complexity in per field merge strategies, especially as mesh config evolves and we keep on putting new things in mesh config. It's not a bad thing to think about, but I do think it's a decent bit of complexity, but I wonder if we can punt.
So Keith, would that punt mean simply settling on one merge strategy, like a deep merge, and just saying that's what we're going to use overall?
No, I mean, I don't think that that's viable just because we already have one merge strategy, and that would be a breaking change for people who depend on the existing merge strategy. I think this problem is Zue's done a good job of sort of bringing more data and finding clear use cases that are a problem across multiple fields. From what I understand of the problem, a deep merge, an alternate deep merge approach would address those problems. It might cause others, but we essentially give users a choice. If we've come back and we find that that's still not sufficient, then I think we can take on, we can make the decision to tackle the complexity required to sort of solve this holistically, which might look like a field by field merge. It might look like a combination of 3 merge strategy. It might look like re-examining mesh config, not whether or not we should have it, but just like re-examining mesh config as it is, because there's a lot of stuff in there, and there are a lot of different directions we can take it. But I wonder if we can't punt that for even more use cases that wouldn't be solved by giving a choice between sort of this custom merge and a more deep merge-esque kind of approach. Does that make sense?
I think so. You're effectively saying, let's go with a simpler strategy hidden behind a feature flag and have a look at adoption.
Exactly.
Anyone else have thoughts or want to weigh in on that? John, so you've raised the most concerns about the deep merge strategy. Does trying it out behind a feature flag sort of fit your expectations, or do you still have concerns about that?
I definitely think that there's no way we can just switch to a deep merge strategy. Like that's guaranteed to break people and be wrong in many cases. If we want an option to opt into it for special cases or something, like it's relatively minor complexity to have different code paths, but there's absolutely no scenario, I think, where we just switch to deep merge. That behavior is wrong in more cases than it's right.
Okay.
And it's also a lot less flexible because in the case of overwrites, you can always fix it. I get that it may be hard to do it, but you can do it. But in the case of deep merging, it's impossible to fix when you deep merge when you don't want to. So the current approach we have is flexible, if not plausible to accidentally break yourself. What deep merging is, even if you know what you're doing.
I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following the part about it being easy to fix the existing merges when they don't do what you want. What do you mean by that?
Like worst case scenario, if I wipe out your setting that said like foo equals bar, I can just add that to my rule too, even if I don't care explicitly to set it. But if it deep merged it, there's no way I can set like foo remove your bar, right?
Right. So Jway, would hiding this behind a feature flag meet your needs?
Yeah, that will meet my needs. So as for John's last question, I just think, yeah, for deep merge, if someone specified in shared mesh config, then the mesh config still has a way to override by explicitly set that subfield with some field with some value or the default value, empty value, kind of, because standard mesh config still takes the precedent.
Yeah, then you still need to know like the default that's compiled into Istio, and in some cases, because of the merging we do, like a list, for example, a deep merge of a list is to append. You can't undo an append.
I see.
Yeah, we have this problem with Envoy filter. We have the exact same problem, but in the opposite way with Envoy filter, where in Envoy filter we do a deep merge and we cause all sorts of problems like this.
Do we have a lot of lists in mesh config? I'm not sure.
Curves, elliptic curves for ciphers, at least.
Mention providers, trust domain,
Trust domain, yep.
aliases. I don't know.
Okay, so Jay, it sounds like you and I have some work to do to understand if the merge strategy you've got is going to meet the needs that we're trying to address for our customers. If so, we can roll those out behind a feature flag in 127. And if not, we may need to revisit a more nuanced merge strategy. Does that sound like where our consensus has gone?
Okay, so sorry, just make sure I understand. So we could try to put this behind a feature flag, right? And try.
We can, yes. Do we just need to make sure, like you and I need to make sure, not as a part of the open source work, that our customers' needs that we're trying to address with this change are actually going to be solved by it. That we're not going to introduce new problems regarding lists. So we'll need to do a little bit of research about how this is being used by Microsoft, but you and I can take care of that offline.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for the discussion. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, next up, I think, is Jackie, who has some conversation around FIPS and PQC.
It's me.
Jacek. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay.
I can see him later though, but so if that helps.
Okay, can I start?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to push forward a discussion about compliance policy API and especially about post-quantum cryptography, which we wanted to enable with compliance policy, but we don't know how this feature should be enabled. So I would like to listen to your opinion, what compliance policy should be, because we started with PIPS 140, which is a standard. And now we have two new compliance policies, which are this one, FIPS 2022-05, is borrowing specific, right? And PQC is completely abstract thing. There is no FIPS standard for this kind of cipher suites and key exchanges algorithms. So I would like to listen to your opinion, what we can do about that, and what do you expect? An opinion? Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I can start because I'm actually opened the PR that Mitch is showing now. I think the core of this question really boils down to how much Istio wants to take on when it comes to these compliance policies versus how much we even can delegate to things like boring. The first point in 4.2-2 compliance policy is somewhat manual. We do it all in code. We configure our gRPC servers, our client, etc., to make sure that the connections use those things that are specified with FIPS 140-2. One of the major things being ensuring that the maximum TLS version is TLS 1.2 and not 1.3. Sort of as time has gone on, boring. Well, a couple of things has happened with FedRAMP and update streams with boring SSL, et cetera. And so now Envoy is exposing boring SSL specific compliance policies that don't sort of make any statement around what FIPS 140 or lack thereof, like what standard that compliance policy applies to. It's just a boring compliance policy that correlates to a date of some sort. It might be the date of a FIPS certificate, whatever. So one option that we have is to just rely on that, even though boring doesn't make any determination as to whether it's compliant or not, we can sort of independently say that it is or isn't compliant. The other option is to sort of maintain it ourselves, to sort of continue doing things in code, setting the different curves and things like that. I think what Jacek, you're doing for post-quantum crypto falls into that second bucket, because there is no boring policy for like post-quantum.
Yeah, exactly.
So the only reason I hesitate is because that is a good bit of work to continue to maintain those curves and read the document, the FedRAMP and FIPS policies moving forward. That is something that we'd be taking on as a project and making statements to users about. But I don't know that I see a way around that, given the state of the ecosystem and the fact that we can't make boring add like post-quantum compliance policies or anything like that.
Okay. Another opinion? John?
I don't have strong opinions. I'm not too familiar with the.
Okay. So
just a quick question, Keith, because you probably looked into this a bit more. Is the new FedRAMP requirement / guidance potentially in conflict with the NIST guidance?
Go ahead.
Right. So that, I mean, Istio's job is to pick a build target, right, and release against it, and say what that does, right? That's as far as Istio should go. If those two things are in conflict, right, and Istio is not going to provide any certification or assurance that it is out of the box FIPS compliant or out of the box FedRAMP compliant, right? It is not Istio's job to say that it is compliant. It's Istio's job to say what it did and what it used.
I will push back on that slightly, in that the current implementations of compliant policies are Istio code. So we're not just picking a build of boring crypto or things like that. We are changing cipher suites in code. We are changing.
Oh yeah, no. So we can say, right, we do X, and this is what we're doing, and we can even say that that is aligned with, right?
Yes, or compliant with, potentially, yeah.
Oh well, compliant is a very strong word to use.
The Istio open source project is not making any explicit guarantees. Vendors may choose to do that based on the open source code.
Right. So we follow the guidance, right? But we are not compliant with, because we do not validate compliance, right? We have to be real careful about the language when we do that. I completely agree. Like, we are following TLS 1.3 here, and we are using a subset of ciphers that were approved in NIST 140-2, and I haven't checked if they're in NIST 140-3. I want to, right, so like we can say those things, right?
Yes.
But we can't say the word compliant. Right? Cannot.
It depends. It depends, right? Even if our builds aren't technically compliant, compliant. I can take compliance and validation in different ways, but yes, we can bike shut on language later. But yeah, generally, okay, so yes. I agree. There's a distinction. There's a distinction. I agree.
Okay. Now, on the technical point, FedRAMP versus NIST, right? Because the new FedRAMP guides say use the latest build. I think I'm getting this right, of a library that was previously FIPS certified.
It does not
correct
quite say that. It says you may use an update stream, which for boring SSL, they are defining that as their master branch, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, but it boils down to take a build of a thing that was previously FIPS compliant. FIPS
right.
Certified.
Yes. Certified, yes. Certified, yes.
God, this is headache inducing. So if somebody comes and says, so since Istio doesn't say we are FIPS compliant or certified, but we can say which build we're taking. And we have to choose between taking an update stream build and be a little bit more FedRAMP-ish in our process, which I think we would prefer to do because we prefer to take latest, right, in general.
Well, I don't think we have that choice because Envoy is picking the update stream.
Yeah, Envoy has made that choice for us, and there are people that seem to know more about this compliance
And are they
and I that don't seem very happy with that choice.
Yeah, I'll say the FedRAMP guidance is extremely new. It's like it came out in January, and it basically throws out like years of previous knowledge and process in when it comes to how software consumes FIPS validated modules.
Right, but it's also probably more safe and more practical.
And that is why they did it, right? That's what's got people upset. You're trading off the validation piece and the verification piece with being more secure because you're taking the latest thing with the latest security patches, latest post-quantum direction, etc.
Okay, and Envoy is specifically is it taking a FIPS certified build, or is it taking an update stream?
It's taking the update stream.
Oh,
okay.
Boring.
And people are unhappy. Why?
There was some chain guard guys that were claiming that their interpretation of the guidelines was that it's not saying, hey, just go use the latest one because latest is great. It's more that if you're in a situation where the validated one is screwed and has vulnerabilities or whatever, then it's better to use the latest one because the previous one is bad. Not that you should just always do it without reason. I don't know if it's right. I'm just saying that's the argument made. They were kind of making some logic like, hey, is there CVEs that we can assign to the old validated one? Then we have an excuse to use the new one, which is kind of a red flag, but it could be a red flag in the government policy, their interpretation of it. I have no idea.
That sounds right to me. And I think part of this is that Boring seems to have been a bit reckless with what they're considering to be their update stream as just like the master branch rather than like a branch based off of the last certified build that has known CVEs patched and backported to that one.
Yeah, but they're also super conservative with which changes they take.
Yes.
Like obviously,
yes,
right. Different people will define update stream differently. It's up to projects to define that based on their understanding of how CVs and their own code maintenance policies. So like we shouldn't overrule Boring's own process for determining what they should put in their update stream. People can go yell at Boring and they can change eventually.
People can go fork Boring if they want to.
Yeah. I don't think we want to wade into that, right? Until we have a good reason to wade into that.
And for what it's worth, I think to come back to keeping the context of what Yasek's bringing forward, like his thing, from what I understand, has nothing to do with FIPS. It's post-quantum specifically, and some of those post-quantum guidelines that might eventually become part of FIPS, but as of today, as I understand it, are a separate set of compliance guidelines and that, in fact, I think conflict with FIPS in some cases.
Right. So those are two different things, right? Like if we ever Istio wanted to offer that, right, and they were in conflict, we would have to provide some API to let people make a choice.
And that API today does exist via compliance policy, right? Users can set an EMV var saying, use the FIPS 4.2 compliancy. Yasek has a PR out that basically lets them say, use the post-quantum crypto compliance policy. And I think the question, Yasek, correct me if I'm wrong, the question is, do we want to go ahead and sort of make that statement and sort of let compliance policy be our API for letting users choose those things, or do we want to do something different? Because I think this is the crossroads. Yes. Once we put that out there, we can't walk that back.
I'm especially interested if we could introduce policies like PQC, which is not any standard policy. It's just something kind of something ours, which it could be changed in the future if new standards are will happen in the industry. And so yeah, my question was if compliance policy must be official FIPS standards or it could be something abstract. And since post-quantum has not FIPS standard for hybrid post-quantum algorithms, I don't see another option. And configuring that manually is really difficult. So
yeah, I mean, I don't have an objection to allowing the API to say things other than FIPS, no FIPS, right? That's not a problem. I think we need to be very clear in the API surface. Like if there is no standard, right, you should say like, post-quantum experimental,
Okay.
right? Because like you could point to the doc, right? That's fine. I think we have to be very careful, right, with interop if there are, in this specific case, right, it's the key negotiation phase that needs to be post-quantum safe.
Yep.
And if one side is not using the same set of flags, right, they may not be able to communicate. And so do we need a permissive versus a strict?
Hmm.
I mean, to figure that out.
Ian's got a hand raised, but I will say that I don't think we did that for FIPS 148-2. Like if there is a TLS 1.3 client, that connection would not succeed.
Yeah.
Implementation wise.
You mean a TLS 1.2 client, right? Because we picked TLS 1.3 as the baseline for zTunnel.
Well, I'm talking about the TLS 142 that does not allow TLS 1.3. So when you have
Cha-Cha Poly would not have worked, but because they negotiate ciphers, right, you could have guaranteed that at the intersection of FIPS 140-2 and TLS 1.3 would negotiate. I don't know if that's true for the PQ.
we'll follow up on that. Ian, go ahead. Why don't we get to your comment?
I think Louis sort of addressed it with calling it like post-quantum experimental or whatever, but I was just going to ask if we make any sort of like guarantees about the stability of these compliance policies, and like what happens when tomorrow they come out and they say, okay, these are no longer the post-quantum recommendations. This is broken. You need to change this. Like, yeah, what do we do at that point?
I think
that's
this
experimental too.
I think this is the reason why it would be good to document it as an experimental thing, as this is still under research, and I would just say explicitly in the documentation that it's experimental. It may change in the future. We don't guarantee anything. It's for trying this.
Sounds like there's agreement on that for post-quantum that should unblock EOSIC. Anybody disagree with that? And we're good with this being an experimental sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Either experimental or alpha. We have to decide which of those terms we want to use, but we can bike shit that in the PR. That's fine.
Yep. Unstable, something like that.
That's great. I have one more question. So, compliance policy controlled by was controlled by Istio, ECD, but in case of PQC, we have to enable that in zTunnel as well. So this environment variable would need to be added to zTunnel. Are you okay with that? Because zTunnel is not controlled by Setcar injection, so we don't have any other option, or at least I don't see anything better. Jan also suggested making it a build time flag, but it will also require to customize zTunnel anyway, if you want to use it. So either way, it requires customizing somehow zTunnel. One option requires customizing image, another adding a variable, right?
Should this just be build time regardless?
I didn't expect that because post-quantum algorithms are already available in AWS LC library, so it's already there in the compiled code. So I didn't see any reason to exclude that at the build time. If that would require including additional library, then that would be reason to exclude that in the default build. But if it's already there, and it will be also in OpenSSL in the future, it's not yet available, but it will be, then maybe it's not required.
Yeah, I think it should be runtime. Right, we can always like immediately fail a startup, right, if the library we're bound to doesn't support it. So we should probably have that check. But right, there's no, like, these really are just cipher selections, right? So presumably all the libraries will eventually support some reasonable subsetting of them.
Okay, awesome.
And the fact that it's marked experimental, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's okay for it to be, like, if you used OpenSSL and it wasn't doing it, we check, okay, this was built with OpenSSL, we won't start.
That sounds good to me.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that we have consensus. We can go to the next topic.
I think we're out of time, are we?
Mitch, you're muted again.
I'm doing that a lot, aren't I? Yeah, we're over time, so I'll go ahead and make the cut of topics we didn't get to, move those to next week's meeting. Just as a quick note, I will not be available to lead next week's meeting as I'll be on a flight. So if one of the other TOC members could take the lead on that, that would be great, and I will watch the recording.
I don't have permissions to record, so if somebody owns the invites and wants to give me that so I can record in the absence of, I guess, John or Louis.
I think John and I are both there anyway, so.
Okay, cool.
Somebody else can click the button for you, Keith, but we should figure that out anyway.
Yes.
All right, sounds good to me. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.